You know what? If all the wars I've covered, every single one has been started by a small group of greedy men. Every single one. Don't you think we should be talking about that?
This week's guest is many things in no particular order. She's an award-winning journalist, she's an author, she's a human rights advocate, she's a mother, and in the course of her storied career, she's interrogated Islamic State fighters about their crimes, she's told stories no one else would tell about the atrocities of war, and generally shed light on issues others prefer to avoid. Along the way, she became a towering figure for women's rights. Sally Armstrong didn't seem to start with the ambition to do any of that, and in some ways her path has been a series of opportunities that she seized. Sally, so good to have you with us.
Hello, Amanda. It's wonderful to be here.
It's sort of a famous story, but not everybody will know that you were a young mother and a phys ed teacher when the first opportunity to be a journalist came along. And I guess because you're so good at it, you're such a natural at it, I'm curious about why you knew it would be a fit. You must have known on some level.
Well, I did not know. I was a phys ed teacher. A man was opening a magazine in Canada, and another woman gave him my name. I said, "What'd you give him my name for?" She said, "Well, you're always blabbing about exercise to music." And I was doing something called perceptual motor development in children. And you know, this is an interesting fact for anyone raising children. If a small child does not use the large muscles, the ones required for jumping, rolling, skipping, balancing, then when it's time to use the small muscles, the ones required for cutting, pasting, reading, writing, they won't work efficiently. This was way before the time of learning disabilities. And I was talking a lot about that. So she said, "Well, you're always talking about these things." So I gave him your name. So the guy, I took the interview, probably because I was very, very pregnant with our third child, and I was not going to be doing a lot of round off back handsprings the following year. So I took the interview, and he hired me. And he also hired the woman who gave him my name, and a third woman who was the recipe developer at Canada Packers. And the three of us opened a magazine called Canadian Living. And I loved it. I loved it from the very first assignment.
And maybe it is that part of your personality that was so curious and wanting to understand things and share it with others that you were already employing. It sounds like it was in you. It did lead you beyond the scope of the magazines you were at. And I mean, I do think there's something particularly notable about the fact that you were the editor of a magazine called Homemakers Sally, which in today's context feels not quaint, but actually almost undermining of what a lot of women, including you, have been trying to do. It was at that magazine that you actually really stretched your wings as a war correspondent. How does that come to be?
Well, you know, Amanda, at that time, the all-news networks had come into our living rooms, and we were getting these 90-second truncated reports about conflict. There were never any women involved in the story, and I thought, where are they? They're half the population. How come? So I talked my publisher into letting me go to find out where the women were, and that conflict was Sarajevo. And something happened. It might be too long to go into here, but something happened, and I knew it was they were gang raping women in camps.
Right.
And I knew it was a heck of a story, but I was in the magazine business. I could race this international headline to press in about 3 months. That was our lead time. So I gathered everything I could, names, mobile numbers, even the psychiatrist, all kinds of data. And I brought it back and I gave it to a large news agency in Toronto. I said, "Give this to one of your reporters. This is a heck of a story." And 7 weeks later, I saw a 4-line blurb in what was then Newsweek magazine saying they're gang raping women in the Balkans. So I called him. I said, "What happened? What'd you do with that data?" He said, I was going to use it. It was great. But I was busy. I was on deadline. I forgot. I said, 20,000 women were gang raped, some of them 8 years old, some of them 80 years old, and you forgot? And he said, "Oh, Sally, you're always going on and on about the women." And that was my moment. I thought, if no one else is going to do these stories, I'm going to do them.
It's hard not to see a combination of factors at play there. And maybe he was busy. I'm not casting aspersions on one human. There's a squeamishness about sex, sexuality, bodies that, we maybe were getting better about it, but for sure, when you started doing this, was alive and well, right? We didn't talk about these things publicly. It wasn't polite. It was shocking. And then there is this kind of sense that women are somehow less important, that it's not the real story. You were fighting those two forces. You've been fighting those two forces. And I guess I want to bring you right up to today, Sally, and ask, because I feel in some ways some of the stories you've covered have gone full circle, tragically. Are those still as powerful as they were, those two forces?
They are, and they are, I wouldn't call it full circle, but when you have people like Trump in power, you start to worry about losses. But Amanda, they're not sustainable losses. It's true. Now in Sarajevo, everybody was there. CNN was there, BBC, New York Times, CBC, everybody was there. And it wasn't that it was squeamish, it was women didn't matter. And that was the attitude. I mean, look at that fabulous book called Sapiens, which subtitle is The History of Humankind. And Harari does not mention women in the book. And it's an international bestseller. It's about humankind, and it's right now. So it's always there. I say to audiences when I'm speaking to women, don't take your win for granted. There's always someone in the wings looking for a way to undo what you just accomplished. So yes, it's still there, but Amanda, the seed has been planted, it has germinated, it has flourished, and there is no way women are going back. They might in Afghanistan, they've been pulled back, but something's going to happen in Afghanistan, I dare say quite soon. You cannot suppress a flourishing movement. And there's evidence of that everywhere. Do you remember it was February the 18th, 2021. That was when that little craft called Perseverance landed on Mars. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
So that whole voyage was run by women astronauts. But here's the thing. When it was landing on Mars, the woman astronaut who was doing the landing, she said it took them 7 months to get there. And she said the landing would be 7 minutes. And she referred to it as 7 minutes of terror because so many things could go wrong during that 7 minutes. And so they decided to broadcast the landing around the world. I was sitting in my kitchen listening to it. And she broadcast every bit of the 7 minutes of terror. And it landed and it worked. There was tremendous celebration. She was mobbed by the media. And they said, what can you compare this to? This is extraordinary science. This is history to the max. 7 months, 7 minutes of what can you compare this to? You know what she said? She said childbirth. And I started cheering. I thought, you know what? When one of the most incredible scientific endeavors is accomplished, and it's accomplished by a woman, and her comment compares it to childbirth, I'd say we're winning.
I want to believe that's true. And of course, obviously great strides have been made in many places. We have to talk about Afghanistan. And I want to start by asking you whether you think if the women of Afghanistan were a race of people, an ethnic group, whether the world would be as quiescent as we are about what's happening there. Because genocide gets tossed around, Sally, so I don't want to use it lightly. But the subjugation of this one group in Afghanistan, and everybody seems to be rolling along and ignoring it.
So that to me is the biggest question today, is why do we allow certain things to run past us? Why don't we analyze them? They call the 20 years the international community was in Afghanistan a failure. During that 20 years, life expectancy moved from 47 years to 63 years. Maternal mortality dropped by 50%. Kids went back to school. Nation building began. This isn't a failure. This is a miracle. Mm-hmm. So what happened? Well, we know what happened. We know what happened at the end. In fact, I did a book on it with Dr. Seema Samar, the famous warrior. And to tell you the truth, I was so worried. We knew that Trump had interfered. We knew he'd made a deal with the Taliban. We knew from the Afghan soldiers what the deal was. But I said to Seema, we can't get one thing wrong. It has to be absolutely perfect or we'll be attacked for this. And I called the State Department. I said, can I have a report? And they sent me the report. That's the beauty of a democracy. So I had it, and it's all in the book. So it collapsed. But why I think the world walked away from Afghanistan because they felt they'd already given enough. But do you know the international community stayed in South Korea for 35 years before they left? And now look, you see out of the wings comes someone trying to stir it up again.
Hmm.
So we have a bizarre notion, and we do it I've been covering war for more than 3 decades.
Yeah.
We do it in every country. We go in with great style, and we exit without a plan. And so what happened? I believe Afghanistan will turn. I think something's happening right now. One of the ministers spoke out and said, we have to let the girls go to school. He's now in exile in Turkey. He had to leave within 24 hours. 2 more ministers have followed. And what I've noticed in civil war is when the bad guys start fighting with each other, you open up a wedge and people can come through that wedge, not to take over, but to say, listen, your people are starving. We know where the food is, or your economy's in the ditch. We know how to get the money rolling. And then you move in and you start to make the changes. And I believe in the very short term, that's what's going to happen in Afghanistan. But I'm a bit of an optimist, I have to
Gosh,
admit.
I hope your optimism is borne out. To me, one of the really dark moments that was, really almost made me sick to my stomach was the idea that women in Afghanistan shouldn't speak to one another, that they'd be prohibited from talking, more than, outside of their homes. They couldn't actually exchange any conversation or ideas on top of everything else, right? They can't see a doctor anymore because women aren't allowed to be doctors and they're not allowed to see male doctors. And so there's no medical care for women in Afghanistan today. These are all things that I feel like the international community should speak up about. Sally, in 1999, I was in New York, and it was the last time Canada was on the Security Council of the UN. And the people at the UN, our mission there, were working really hard to impose sanctions on Afghanistan because of the treatment of women. And they were voted down by powerful players. I want to say, including Russia, or the US was the biggest one that voted against the sanctions. And of course, it was very soon after that Afghanistan became the heart of a terrorist movement that would strike America. You see the ramifications of these things
absolutely.
in real time.
Yeah.
Do we need to make those connections? Do we need to remind people that the people who suppress others are coming for us too? They don't stop at their own women. They have ambitions to suppress people, and they don't tend to stop at home.
Of course, we need to be talking about that. Almost everything that happens in the American government today leads you to say, how could you do that? You know what? If all the wars I've covered, every single one has been started by a small group of greedy men. Every single one. Don't you think we should be talking about that? It seems to me there's a small group of greedy men hanging around the White House these days. And yet, every single war, the people I talked to were shocked when it came to war. Even though things were terrible, they were frightened to death. They wondered, should we leave? Should we stay? They say the day after the war begins, I never thought it would come to this. So why aren't we talking about that?
I wrote that quote down, a small group of greedy men, because it does really, the hair on the back of your neck stands up when you think about what's happening in America. And again, these things happen in stages, and you've been there to see how societies break down, how its weakest, most vulnerable members are often the kind of leading edge of how we see the kind of destruction of the structures that protect people. Where do you think we are on that? And we don't want to be alarmist. Nobody's saying women will not be allowed to go to school in America, but the rights of women are being rolled back and being challenged in the United States today. I think there's no question about that. Where are we on a continuum to war?
Well, I think we are moving along on that continuum. I think some exceptionally worrisome things have happened. And it seems to me that the leaders who are in a position to be well-informed and believable, they kind of censor themselves. They don't want to go so far as to call things for what they are. Let's leave the White House for a minute and go to the Taliban. Can you imagine a government saying women are not allowed to speak? And the leader, he said, a woman's voice causes a man to sin. This is depravity. This is sexual depravity. He's at,
Yeah.
that if you speak, I will have to rape you. And we're not paying attention to that. Now you can take a version of that to the United States today. And where are we? Why aren't we saying these things? In the United States, it took until yesterday for even Democratic senators to say that this call for fentanyl was rubbish. With the free trade agreement, you have to have a security issue before you can break it. So they made that up, the fentanyl thing. And nobody really in their government said it to you. What is the matter with people? Their job is to serve their people, not to keep their limo and their car service.
Project 2025 was treated as, this terrifying document in efforts to keep, this very situation from happening. So I went and read it, and I encourage people to read it. It's 900 pages, but it's readable, and it's kind of a coherent ideological worldview from the right. Where it comes to gender issues, socially conservative issues around the family, we haven't yet seen those. We've started to see some of those policies, but not really from the Trump administration in full force. That's where I get a little concerned about when you talk about rolling back rights that could set women back. Are the structures, the policies, the systems we have in place in this part of the world strong enough that those efforts they don't have any hope of succeeding?
Well, they are strong enough. But if you elect someone who doesn't give a damn about those things, they roll back. And then they go to court and they spend 10 years trying to sort it out in court while the human rights are lost to people. There's a thing about populist men in power that feel stronger by removing human rights rather than embracing human rights. It's almost the way we can test a government. And this is also attached to the economy. It was Jeffrey Sachs, the great world economist, who said the status of women in the economy are directly related. Where one's flourishing, so is the other. Where one's in the ditch, so is the other. Well, I think a kid in grade 5 could figure that out today.
Yep.
And yet we're not paying attention to it. We have laws. And I'm saying I'm referring to both the United States and Canada. I dare say, because of a parliamentary system, we are better able to protect our laws than you are in a presidential system. But who stops people like this? And how do you, it does come down to that continuum of war.
What is the right action to take? And now we're in Canada. We're not voting in or out any of these people. The influence can be felt, but we are our own entity, and gladly so. To go from, girls not allowed to leave their homes in Afghanistan to, women who are making 80 cents on the dollar here, it might feel trivial. You might say, look, you have it pretty good. But women in Canada still are not equal. There are a bunch of different ways you could point to, and we're trying. Everybody's trying. Good intentions, I suppose. What should we be doing now in this time where it does feel as though there's fragility around some of these issues?
Again, it comes down to leadership, because they're the ones that get to put the attention on the things they want to put the attention on. But Amanda, I will say that I think hyper-nationalism is generally a problem. I've seen it turn into war in the Balkans. I've seen it turn, and tribal areas are very, very susceptible. But they're not hyper-nationalism, they're just tribal. So we are in a hyper-nationalism stage, which I think is the best thing that has ever happened to Canada. We have everything. Everything. I'm not exaggerating. We have the land, we have the resources, we have the trained workforce, we have multiculturalism, we have everything. What we need is the leadership that not only knows how to take it forward, but has the nerve to take it forward. It's pretty darn easy to trade with your neighbor. You don't have to worry so much about getting around the world with your pocket of goods. But now we can't do that. So I see this as our time. And I tell you, the one thing I worry about is the women's movement was so strong in the 80s and into the 90s. But now I think a lot of people feel we've already made it. As you mentioned, we don't have to worry. we need lots of women involved in the establishment of this new, huge Canada that I believe is going to happen. I really do. And even though I think hyper-nationalism can lead to trouble, not right now in Canada, but we have to be vigilant because wins are easily taken away and traded for something that someone else thinks are more important. And even though we're half the population, our rights, our pay level, our opportunities cannot be traded. And I think we need a voice out there.
Your Massey lectures and subsequent book really tells the story of this issue. I think with one exception in early Mesopotamia, women have been a second class to men throughout our recorded history. And you talk about it as a long struggle. And obviously progress has been made, certainly relative to when we weren't allowed to own land or even more very recently vote. But it's to me so fascinating. And I come at this late, Sally. If I'm honest, there was a time in my life when I thought, I don't need to be a feminist because we won that battle, right? The victory is that I don't need to carry that chip on my shoulder. And then later in life, I thought, it's so odd that one gender subjugated another. How did it even happen? When did it happen and why? But it has happened in subtle ways and systemic ways. It continues. And honestly, this very conversation will turn off half of the listeners. Or the male listeners will think, oh God, here we go again. Because they don't feel like they're doing anything wrong. But we are in this odd place where it's a struggle that continues. You sound optimistic about it. You sound as though the continuum has a good destination.
I think I am optimistic about it because the fix is not complicated. And you're right, it's time for the men to take up the battle. We cannot get to the finish line unless we walk beside each other. And I thought it would be men my generation, once they got quiet, that the trouble would be over. But young men are picking up the same torch of, I have to be first. Don't let that girl get in the way of my promotion. There have been so many papers written on the value of equality and justice that we don't need to go there again. What we need is time for the dads and the brothers and the bosses and the preachers and everybody else to walk with us because it's better. Everybody knows that. Why on earth would you try to keep a woman back? And I think the more people with power speak out about that, the better we are. But you tell me this. Intimate partner violence is one of the statistics that has never budged. From the time we started fighting for rights in the late 60s, it has never budged. And I believe we've done everything. We've changed the law. We put up shelters all over the place. We built up awareness. We told everybody what the problems were. We started the conversation. You show me one CEO in this country look at the bank CEOs. They have 200, 400,000 employees. Show me one that ever stood up and said, if you are harming your partner, I will fire you because that's criminal behavior. They won't say it. And if they did, and he'd have to say, if you have a problem with this, we'll help you. We know where help is. And if you don't want the help, you're gone. But if you want the help, we'll get you the help. No one says that. No one says it. Show me a coach of a well-known baseball, basketball, hockey team that says if you're hurting a woman off the ice, the field, you're off the team. It won't happen. And until we understand that is where our civilization is, it's hard to get to the finish line. We'll get there, but it's harder.
You know, one of the things I've been most struck about you, I've been a fan for a long time. You must have an innate courage, Sally. It must be in your nature to run towards difficulty and danger, because it isn't war zones are not for the faint of heart. And I say that as someone who's been adjacent and removed myself with haste. They're not places for everybody. It takes a certain kind of willingness to be there, and we so need that. We so need people who are willing to do it. And then once you're there, there was some quality in you. What is that quality that then said, I'm not only going to be here, I'm going to go into a jail cell with ISIS fighters. I'm going to go talk to women who could be murdered for telling their stories. What's that in your nature?
Well, I've seen you take on some pretty tough files too. And I
Not
think
the same
for
way.
all of
Don't.
us, it's the story. We want the story. We want to shed light on the wrong. And I think we're driven by that. They are hard places to work. Um, the stories of those women, they play on the back of my eyelids all the time. How are they doing? Did that ever happen? But forgetting the story, I think you're so determined to get the story. You push the. They are scary. I was going to say you push the fear aside. That's not true. I'd be lying.
But from the very beginning, are you naturally a risk taker? Is that just part of your DNA, or did you have to learn it?
A risk. Yeah, I would say that.
One of the things you've done is be an example, of course, to women everywhere, but to people everywhere, to journalists, to writers, to human rights activists. I know one of your children, Peter. He's a accomplished journalist, and I've had the privilege of working with him. What do your kids make, do you think? How are they different because of what you've done in the world?
I don't, that's a tough question to answer. I'm really proud of my kids, not only for what they do, but they're all humanitarians. They will all reach out. And like any of us who've been in these places, we get involved with bringing people here and resettling them. My kids are the first ones to arrive with, a chair or a snowsuit or whatever. So I'm really proud of the way they're humanitarians. But their dad, he was really a heck of an example. And I think between the two of us, I hope I can say that they see life as a time to go out there and live it up, get it all, take part, be involved, do it. I hope that's what they get from both of us, really.
I think that's probably something you've actually instilled in a lot of people, that there's more we could be doing because we see people like you doing it. Is there anything you haven't yet done? Is there something you'd like to do again, or some place or story that is still in your future?
Oh, there's tons of stuff I'd like to do. I'd love to get back into Afghanistan and tell the story from this side of what's happening, but I'm on a Taliban list and they won't let me in. I'd like to do that. You know what? I like stories. I like shining a light on something that needs attention, and then you leave it to the readers, the listeners, the viewers, and they pick up the torch. I like doing that.
My hope is that there aren't stories like this closer to home, that we're not entering some dystopian era where you find these kinds of issues right on our doorstep.
It's scary, isn't it?
It is scary, but maybe you stand between us and being blindly led into it.
Mind you, I think sometimes these ghastly times bring out the people who wouldn't have spoken out before. And I am encouraged by the solidarity between other nations. People are quick to say the United States can crush you. But I loved listening to the people in Greenland. I love listening to the president of Denmark. You find your friends when you're in trouble. And I think if Canada's in trouble, we have found our friends. I like to know that we're trading with other people. You know, I went to that Elbows Up rally, and I was really knocked out by the way we feel about ourselves, because this is a spectacular place. So part of me is excited about the possibilities for growth because of this, but part of me is nervous because a group of greedy men are in charge of a country with a huge military.
And that doesn't always end well.
No.
We're going to leave it there, Sally. It's so good to have you with us.
Thank you.
We've been speaking with Sally Armstrong. Before you go, here are 3 things we think are worth watching this week. With a nail-biter of an election behind us, attention now turns to how the new parliament will function. A minority Liberal government without an obvious partner to pass spending bills now that the NDP has lost official party status. That leaves the regional Bloc Québécois as one possible dance partner. Or dare we say it? Could the two most popular parties work together to pass spending bills for Canadians? Of course, the Conservatives need to get their leader into the House first, but don't worry, we'll wait. And some evidence of how trade wars screw up economies, or at least economic data. The U.S. posted a contraction in its economy in the first 3 months of the year, but that was actually because imports surged as businesses and consumers rushed to get ahead of the incoming tariff costs. Imports are counted against growth in order to avoid double counting, since it's stuff that businesses or consumers will spend on, and that's captured elsewhere. So more activity is considered a weak economy. This is why people don't like economists. Still, there are signs of a slowdown in personal spending, which could cause trouble ahead. Plus, RBC said it's backing off its sustainability commitments. Not because it's less committed, it says. Its new anti-greenwashing laws are making it riskier to try to report its activities, since it's unclear how those laws will be applied and even less clear how sustainable finance will be reported by all. Let's call this one an unintended consequence of a well-intentioned law. That's WONK for this week. I'm Amanda Lang.